And finally today, for something completely different. Amy Franceschini is using art to deconstruct how we think about food and indeed political systems as a whole. Her project, Future Farmers, is tackling everything from urban planning to art installations in the name of human connection with food and land. Take a look.
We're mostly interested in politics or activity around food production, and it is definitely a concern about the natural environment, but it's also a concern about the social politics connected to food and who is growing our food and for whom and by whom and how that food is consumed, produced, and distributed.
Talk a little bit about how that translates into your art, this interest in systems, the deconstruction, and the political aspect of our relationship to food.
To be honest, we operate in the art world because it's still a place that seems to be the most open. And I almost sometimes feel like we get away with doing urban planning or politics through the art world. So, for instance, right now we've been working in Oslo for 5 years on a permanent public artwork in a new waterfront development. And that's totally politically contentious, right? It's this massive development project. There's the first part of that project was a series of banks. What we proposed was to use a common area in this waterfront that was quite derelict, and they were just kind of leaving it to the side for 20 years until they finished the big opera house, the National Museum, the Munch Museum. And we kind of secretly knew that if we chose a place that wasn't really looked at for a few years, that we might be able to get away with some things and actually get some roots there and change the face of the development in this area. But we've started an urban farm. There's a community garden, which was the starting community. And now we're building a permanent building called a bakehouse. So it has 3 different ovens that you can bake in, and it has a greenhouse. So we also wrote in 2007, I did a similar project in San Francisco called Victory Gardens. And through that project, we wrote a city ordinance that the city adopted, which said they would spend more money on urban agriculture and all of these kind of reasons why, a whole charter. We sent it to Oslo to propose that they should adopt it. And when the political system changed in September, they actually adopted that policy into their new green government agenda, like verbatim, which was amazing. So again, like through the back door of the art world, I think when we're invited into a situation, we kind of look for where there's a gap or cracks in the master plans and try to enter through the back door.
That's really fascinating. It reminds me of the situation in Canada where a man created an art project on his land so that a pipeline wouldn't go through it and then copyrighted it.
Yes.
So this is really about the intersectionality of art and creativity in so many different mediums. I mean, a bakehouse, a lot of people wouldn't consider that to be an art project, and yet the Flatbread Society is what it's called, right? Is this intersectionality of so many different mediums and with this political goal. So I also want to ask you, grain seems to be present in a lot of different installations and projects that you do, from the mast acting as sort of a grain silo, the land grant that chronicles our relationship to grain. So what is it about grain specifically as opposed to other fruits or vegetables or things like that that really speaks to the Future Farmers ideology?
In Norway, they actually call flatbread a storage economy because it was actually how they would store their grains for the year. And they would bake it in these flat, round pieces with a hole in the middle and then hang them in the ceiling for the winter. And it actually kind of looks like currency or like data when it's hanging up there. And so I started reading more about the history of grain and just like the history of grain as it's related to the idea of civilization. And something we wanted to do here within this capital project of this waterfront was have a place that we can question, like, where have we come from? Where are we now? And, we're in this highly civilized waterfront development. What have we gained? So some things that have come out of the project already is a question of local currency or a trade economy, and to demonstrate it and test it out within the context of Flatbread Society.
So how do you see this progressing past this waterfront? Are you going to do other? Is there an impetus to do other such projects, permanent projects in other places?
So we've been invited to do projects in Istanbul and in Moscow. But the last kind of aspect of this project is this September, we've been growing these ancient grains on the field. And that's pretty much a centerpiece of the urban farm is this old grain field. And all the grains that we've been growing there were kind of thought to be extinct in the early 1900s. And then in the 70s were found in strange places, like one of the rye we're growing was found between two boards and a roof of a sauna. But we have 9 different varieties like that have been found in strange places. And we're taking them this September on a boat, which will go all the way around the western side of Europe and the Atlantic, down through the Mediterranean to Palestine, and then to Istanbul to retrace this movement of the grains to the Nordic part of the world. And so through that, what we're trying to do is carry these questions that we started asking here to different localities. So every place we stop along the way is a group of seed savers or small scale farmers who are, kind of fighting to survive and protecting these seeds and keeping them out of the industrialized agricultural landscape. So as you might know, in about 3 summers ago, the EU tried to pass a law that farmers were only allowed to grow certified seeds. And there was huge demonstrations, and that law has been stopped, but there's still like a fear of, that might encroach again. So that project is called the Seed Journey, Flatbread Society Seed Journey. The Seed Journey is like carrying these questions and then activating them into a more documentary space.
So finally, I want to ask you because you've talked a little bit about like the this waterfront that has the community or the banks, and there's these new architectural projects springing up. There's the EU ruling on seeds, and the GMO fight is still very present in both the U.S. and the EU. And meanwhile, there's a lot of push for urban farming, both obviously in the EU and in the US. Talk about these two parallel tracks, and where do you think that, I mean, we've seen where the past is, and you guys are doing sort of an artistic representation of retracing those steps. What about the future?
I learn most from small scale farmers who are affected by politics, global warming, and just how hard it is to farm. And I think what I've learned from them is to create durable and robust local economies. So I feel like the future is going to be more focused on localism rather than globalism. Of course, they're totally tied together. I do think just that we have to revalue our relationships to the place we live and the people that we're surrounded by.
For more information on Future Farmers, visit futurefarmers.com.